up in Lake Zurich, Illinois, which is just outside Chicago, and most of my formative musical experiences happened there when I was growing up playing piano and singing in church choirs, singing in children's choirs. I moved from the Chicagoland area to Eden Prairie, Minnesota, halfway through high school. So I finished up my last 2 years of high school in Minnesota. And I was one of those kids that just could not get enough music. I was in choir during the day. I was in show choir after school. I was in the madrigal group. I was in a barbershop quartet before school started. I was leading bass sectionals during lunch. I was in the drama programs, the plays, the musicals, anything that happened that I could be singing in, I was doing. I also started really finding my love for composing and writing at the same time. I was making arrangements for this quartet that I was singing. It was tenor bass, baritone bass, and we wanted to do songs that we couldn't find in print, that we just heard off the radio. So I would go home and I'd sit at the piano and I'd put headphones on and I'd listen to the tracks and I would try to basically distill them down into 4 a cappella voices. And so it was a very practical start to composing, but I was writing this music out and notating it for my quartet so we could perform these pieces. And so sort of had very small starts there, and then through the course of high school and college sort of developed an interest and curiosity into composing. If you're a composer, and especially if you're writing for voice, I don't think there's anything that can teach you as much as singing in an ensemble. I've sung in ensembles my whole life, and I feel like a lot of what I've learned about writing for the voice has come from that experience. It's not something they teach you a ton about in class, in orchestration class or composition class, but it's more something you just sort of pick up by nature from doing it. I had the fortune of co-founding the men's a cappella group Cantus and spent about 17 years singing in that ensemble. And over the course of those years, I was also writing for the group as well. One of the biggest benefits that I got from writing for that ensemble was the fact that I got to see my music go from my ideas on the page to the concert stage and every single step in between, right? So in a normal compositional conductor relationship, you hand your product off and then you're done until you see it get performed. With Cantus, I was in the room, and since we're a democratic ensemble, we didn't have a music leader or an artistic director. We would decide how we wanted to perform the music in the room. So I would get to be a part of that discussion. I would also get to watch somebody else interpret my music and ask questions about it, things that I was maybe unclear about in the score, or they'd be able to ask me my intentions in a certain place. I would also see what was really tough for singers to hear. Sometimes it's really clear in my ear what I want to have happen, but for somebody else to do it, there's a gap there somewhere along the line. It's either harder to do than I would assume, or again, maybe my intention isn't as clear on the page. So seeing that and being a part of that process the whole way through is very, very valuable to me. And to hear the tenors complain about the range and to say, I can't sing those notes for 3 pages, you got to cut me a break. I'd say, okay, noted. And I'd take that lesson and file it away under tenors complaining about my writing for another day. The other thing I learned from specifically singing in Cantus is that we had a very specific way of presenting music and presenting programs, and there was always there's this emotional undercurrent. There's a narrative in our programming that each piece played a part in that narrative and in that emotional undercurrent. And so as a composer, I drew a lot of what I was giving to people through my compositions from that same sort of dialogue. For instance, if I were going to write a piece, I would have a larger context in mind, and I would have some sort of emotional draw that I'd want the audience to get from that piece in mind already at the get-go from that composition. So a lot of what I value in terms of storytelling, in terms of text that is set to music, and in terms of how this is presented on stage, I learned from Cantus. As far as having a vocal sound in my head for composing, that comes from every choir I've sung with, whether it's in college with the St. Olaf Choir, or whether it's with a professional group like Seraphic Fire or True Concord. I can picture this choral sound in my head, and they're all always a little bit different based on the conductor, based on the singers you have in the room. And if you know what that sounds like, you can write for that kind of ensemble. I would write differently for Seraphic Fire than I would for Vocal Lessons. I'd write differently for Vocal Lessons than I would for cantus, or cantus from a church choir or from a high school choir, because the sound and the way those singers navigate through those ranges is very different depending on the singers you have in the room. So anytime you have a chance to perform in an ensemble, you're just sort of filling up your tool bag with all these tricks and things that you can use to make your compositions richer. Jocelyn Hagan and I run a company called Graphite Publishing, which is a publishing company we started back in 2006. And it's a online digital vocal music publisher, which means that we publish choral music and we publish art song. And it means that people come to our site to download the files directly, print them off, and then rehearse them. It was born out of a desire to find some sort of middle ground in the publishing industry. If you think about a spectrum, on one end of the spectrum, as a composer, you're selling your music to a publishing company in exchange for a small royalty back when they're able to sell it. The other end of the spectrum is independent publishing, or self-publishing, where you're holding on to all that copyright and you're selling your music directly to the customer, but you're also sort of taking on the helm of a small business where you are invoicing, you're shipping, you're dealing with customers, you're filling their orders. And we thought, but you're also keeping everything you make, right, after expenses. We thought there's got to be room for something in the middle where it's maybe more favorable to composers, but also takes some of that burden off their back. So we thought by starting a digital publishing company where the PDFs were automatically delivered, we could bypass a lot of the overhead of a traditional publishing company. So I think one of the tough things about starting a publishing company is trying to find your tribe, trying to find your audience. Who are the people that are going to benefit from this, and how do you reach them, right? One of the reasons we started as well is because we had a lot of music that we had both written, but also some colleagues of ours had written that doesn't fit in a traditional publishing model. So maybe it's longer than your average 3 to 4 minute octavo. Maybe it includes instruments that are harder to find. It's in a different language. It's more difficult. It's multi-movement. So things that are not an easy risk for traditional publishers to take. We thought, well, there's value to this music and it should get out into the world. Maybe this is the easiest way for us to do it. So when we started, we were really looking for a very specific niche market where people were looking for that kind of rep. And as we've grown, we've expanded to include things that are more accessible, things that are written for middle school choirs, elementary school choirs, high school, church, sort of the whole gamut. But again, trying to find our audience of people that want to come and directly download their PDFs and print it, but that also trust our company. We built the company based on a model of trust in the composer, rather than starting a conductors series or an editors series where somebody was picking all the best pieces that they knew. We were out there cultivating a list of composers that we trusted, composers that were writing music that aligned with what we valued in vocal music. So things that were accessible for the voice, things that were accessible for an audience member to listen to right away, but also things that were really well crafted and where it's evident that the composer knows what they're doing and knows how to craft a really rich and deep piece. So after you hear it once, there's something in there that says, I want to go back and hear it again. And you do, and you find something new. And the third time you find something more, and you just keep lowering this depth and you keep finding this richness in the piece itself. So we were trying to build a company whose marketing was based on the names of the people we were publishing, not necessarily the hot piece that we wanted to get out there, but you should trust this person. They're writing good music. And if you like what they're writing, here are 10, 12, 15 other people that we also think you should trust. It's still an obstacle because as an independent publisher, we are not set up to work with dealers and distributors the way that traditional publishers are. So we're constantly fighting that battle and trying to get into reading sessions and trying to circumnavigate the publishing world in a way that a small mom and pop shop independent publisher like Graphite can still play in the bigger industry. Another thing to keep in mind is that as a creative, as an artist, the bottom line of your work is that you have an experience that you're making that you're trying to deliver to somebody. For me, that takes its form as a piece of music that I've written that I want to deliver to an audience. It could be something I'm performing on stage. As a publisher, it's actually the sheet music itself and trying to deliver that to a conductor. Anything that gets in the way of the delivery of that product, you have to figure out a way around that. So when I was in Cantus and we would sing for an audience, there were times when the audience did not leave the hall with the story or the same takeaway that we wanted to give them. They didn't understand some of the music, or they were thrown off track by something. And a lot of times we would take the exact same repertoire, the exact same 12 pieces, let's say, for the first half of a program, and all we need to do is reorder them and start the program with a different song and take this song and move it more toward the middle and end here and give them the exact same musical material, but alter it so that their takeaway, their experience as a listener, was what we intended. I think that's so important to realize, because sometimes you think that there's only one way to deliver something, and if people don't get it, then they're wrong, or they're not thinking the same way you are. But in reality, there are many different ways to package something so that somebody receives something in the way that you intend. So in Graphite, as we're publishing music, we need to make sure we're clear that here's what this piece is, here's what it's not, here's something that will challenge you, here is something that your singers will get out of it. And we try to be very upfront about it as we're promoting this music, saying your singers will be challenged by the counterpoint or the harmonic material or the language, but the voice leading is really accessible, or the content of the poem or the text is something you can actually have conversations about. These are the ways that you can access the music. These are the ways that will challenge your students. And so being very honest and looking at your own art from that standpoint and saying, what am I trying to give? How do I deliver it in the best way possible so that people get what I'm trying to give them? Collaboration has been a part of my work as an artist for a long, long time, starting first with Cantus as this democratic chamber ensemble where there were 9 people in the room and we more or less had to agree on things before we could move forward. Collaboration relies a lot on having a shared safe space for ideas so that you feel like you can put forth your own ideas into this space and they will get heard and understood before they are judged, because the end result is always judging, right? We're always going to say, well, I value this and I don't value that. But as long as there can be some space, and by space I mean either physical space, everybody in the same room where we know that this is a collaborative room, or a whiteboard or a piece of paper or a Google Drive or a shared document where we know that we can pour our creativity into this space. And from there, we will begin to sift through it and figure out what's valuable and what's not. With Cantus, we would, when we were programming a show, we would sit in a room and we would put everybody's ideas up on a whiteboard. And we would have 90 pieces of music staring at us in the face, and we'd have to whittle that down to 18 or 20. And so that whiteboard was our shared space. And by the end of the afternoon, it wasn't clear whose idea was whose, because that wasn't important. We just knew that somebody valued it, and that's why it made it on the board. Now let's talk about these things objectively, apart from anybody else's emotional draw toward that thing or their own ownership of that idea. As a composer, most of my collaborative work happens with poets. And so oftentimes I'm out working with a poet and I'm asking them to write text for me to set to music. And sometimes I give them very little to go on, and sometimes I'm very specific. And I say, I'm looking for a poem that is about this, that includes this type of word. The language is like this, and maybe I need it structured, or I need it metered, or I need it rhymed, or I don't. All those things are something that I give to a poet. They have to synthesize them and then give me a final product in the written word. As a collaborative artist, it's important that we both go into this relationship knowing what's valuable feedback and what's not. In other words, am I allowed to come back to this poet and say, I don't like this line, or I don't understand this, or I wonder if this word could be different, or as I'm setting this to music, I can't fit this in, or I need 3 more syllables. Is that okay, or do I need to set this poem as is, we're done, this is the final product? And I've worked with both types of poets, and both are fair, but I have to know ahead of time so that I don't step on toes, right? So talking about this shared space, part of defining that shared space is figuring out how can I talk with this person? How do we work together to make the best product possible? And if saying things like this type of constructive criticism is off the table, that's fine. I just need to know ahead of time so I don't step on any toes. One of the things that I get asked a lot, especially from emerging composers or young composers, people want to know how to get their music out there and how to spread their musical reach, and that's a really tough question. And it's something that I had to figure out on my own. And I think it also is something that, as an artist, you have to figure out what works for you and what aligns with who you are as a person. For me, one of the valuable aspects of being an artist and being a musician is the relationships. It's the network that you're creating. And I'm saying network, and it's easy to think about marketing and promotion, but I really mean network of colleagues, network of friends whose work I trust, and ideally they trust my work as well. And these are the relationships that fuel what I do. When I'm out to write music, I'm writing music for these people. Obviously, I'm hoping that it'll reach beyond that circle and people that I don't know will also pick it up and perform it. But I'm thinking about these people that value the same kinds of things that I do in music making. They're putting music on stage for the right reasons, and those are the people that really drive my creative process and make me want to write more music. And so, as a young or emerging composer, I would say try to find that tribe, find that network as fast as you can. Try to find those people that value high quality. They value the same kinds of things that you do in your music making. And I think as a professional, my work is really divided between creating music and trying to market my music, right? Because if I don't have another gig lined up, then I'm done. So I'm always trying to make sure I have enough work that will carry me into the future. And also, I have this catalog of over 100 works that I've already written. I'd be missing something if I wasn't trying to get that music out there as well. I'm trying to get more people to buy that music. And there's a way you can do that that will suit you. Some people approach it like a car salesman and they're shaking hands and it's very slick and it's very like, I want to sit down with you and talk about how we can do my music and that you should be doing it. And that works for a lot of people, but that feels a little bit too salesy for me. And again, I would rather develop that relationship first and figure out, if it's a conductor, what that conductor wants, what they value in their own teaching and their program, and then I can look through my work and figure out what I have that aligns with that and say, I can tell you like this sort of thing. Here are 3 pieces that I think you'd really enjoy. Take a look at them, rather than just throwing my entire catalog at them and saying, you should be doing my music, figure out something that works, right? And it can feel very salesy, but if you approach it the right way, and if you approach it in a way that shows what you value, I think it'll really work. Promoting your own music is something that I think is very personal. It depends on how you want to relate with people and how you want them to view you as an artist and as a person. You can go as far as being a salesman about it or saleswoman and really just trying to peddle your works to anybody who will listen. Or you can try to develop the personal relationship first, get to know who that person is, what they value, what they like to teach, what they like to perform, what they like to put on stage, and figure out what you have to offer that might align with that same person. In my own work as a composer, it's always a balance of creating something new, but then also trying to market my skills as a commissioned composer, as a self-publisher, as somebody who's written a lot of works, trying to get that music out there as well. And you can never go too far in one direction, or else you'll miss it. If you're only marketing yourself and marketing your music, how is there time to create something new? And if you're only creating something new but you're not marketing it, then how are you going to get it out there? So you really have to try to find that balance of skills. One of the most elusive things, I think, as a artist, but also just as an adult, is work-life balance and trying to figure out how to draw the line between when you're working and when you're just living your life. I know that when I started as a professional just out of college, I was singing full time with Cantus. I was doing their graphic design work. I was also writing music on the side for the group and also for commission. And so a lot of my life was work. I didn't mind that. I liked getting up in the morning and doing some design work and then going to a Cantus meeting and then going to rehearsal and then coming home and writing music and that being my day. Those were all things I valued and loved, and I loved doing them. As life went on and I got married and had kids, things had to change, right? To support a touring lifestyle where I was on the road 100 plus days a year got harder and harder as I had two boys at home that wanted some attention and my wife who needed some help around the house. So trying to figure out how to draw that boundary and how to work when you're working and not work when you're not, and try to figure out when you have time to hang out and socialize, and for me, read and play board games and go biking and play basketball in the driveway with my kids. You have to really think about that. As a gigging musician, things will come up, and it is your choice whether to say yes or no. And I think when you're young and hungry, it's easiest and probably best just to say yes to everything. But at a certain point, uh, that gets exhausting, and there are other things that are more important that take your time. Um, at this point in my life, I consider myself a husband and a father first and foremost. I'm also a composer and a singer and a publisher and a designer and conductor and all those types of things. But I have to prioritize my family life in order to create a healthy environment for those people around me. And then the rest, and I can dive in with as much as I have, I can dive into composing and being creative. And I still have enough energy left over for that, but it helps me to make a distinct line in the sand. So when my kids come home from school and the bus pulls up, the laptop's shut, the piano is closed, and I try to walk away as much as I can for the rest of the night. I don't start working again until the next morning. And for me, it's great to be able to sort of come home from work in that way. Even though I work from home and I'm surrounded by it all the time, it's nice to be able to shut it down and say, this time is reserved for working and this time is reserved for family and for me. Along your journey, it's important to surround yourself with people that care as much or more than you do about your art. People that hold a high standard of excellence, people that are contagious with their work ethic, people that encourage you and inspire you to work your best and to put your best foot forward. Some of those people will find you along the way. For me, my mother was probably my first music teacher and sort of encouraged me to take piano lessons and put me in the church choir and put me in children's choir and started me along my journey. And so I thank her so much for that. My first few children's choir teachers, Julie Ramsire, Peggy Crawford, when I was a kid, just were there. They knew how much I loved it. They knew how much I needed out of music, and they were always there ready to give me more. Um, when I got into high school at Eden Prairie, Julie Kantok was my choir director at Eden Prairie High School, and she knew how much to give me and how much just to let me go on my own and make my own mistakes and sort of go forward on my own and figure some things out. Singing at St. Olaf with Anton Armstrong was so formative for me, just as far as rehearsal technique, as far as thinking about art as a service, thinking about creating art as a service to others, not as a profession and a way to make money, but truly as something you are giving of yourself to other people. Um, I was always in Cantus surrounded by people that were ready to hold my feet to the fire and make sure that the work I was doing was up to their same standards. And that over the course of 17 years, that was a lot of guys. And that group and those people changed how I function as an artist and how I function as a collaborative human being as well. And I can't be more grateful for that. And then my wife, Jocelyn Hagen, who is a composer and artist, she she was the one that sort of showed me what it was like to care so much about creation and about composing and about art. And to this day, she still inspires me to try harder and to think more and to be more innovative and curious and breaking the mold with my art. And so I'm around her every day, and I learn something new from her just about every day. So big thanks to Jocelyn Hagen as well. But find these people that inspire you, that are contagious in that way, and make sure you're around them as much as you can be, because they will continue to push you forward.